Hello friends, today we are going to talk about the International Court of Justice, its history and a bit of its future. Ever since Kulbhushan Yadav's conviction by a military court, the Hague-based International Court of Justice has been hitting media headlines in the subcontinent. Earlier, there was not much interest in the ICJ. It was really an unknown, almost an unknown entity in this part of the world, except for those who were either in the media or avid followers of international news. But now that the Pakistan National Assembly has adopted a bill to give Yadav the right to appeal as directed by the ICJ, the interest has intensified. So what is this International Court of Justice? What powers does it wield and why must its rulings be complied with? Well, the court has a long and interesting history. Let me outline it here in brief. In the years preceding the First World War, attempts were made to set up a permanent institution that would facilitate the settlement of disputes between nations. This process gained strength when the League of Nations was formed after the war on 10 January 1920 and the Permanent Court of International Justice PCIJ in short was born. Although there was a close association between the League of Nations and the PCIJ, the court was not a part of the League. Yet the League Council and Assembly periodically elected the members of the court. Both the Council and the Assembly were entitled to seek advisory opinions from the PCIJ. Between 1922 and 1940, the PCIJ dealt with 29 contentious cases between states. Here by states we mean independent sovereign nations or countries. And the court issued 27 advisory opinions. This became possible because several hundred treaties, conventions and declarations conferred jurisdiction upon the court over specified categories of disputes. This happened over a period of time. So what is the PCIJ's contribution to international law? Well, it is immense, invaluable in fact. The court developed a proper judicial process. The rules of court drawn up in 1922 and subsequently revised in 1926, 1931 and 1936 have been important milestones in the progress of international law. The PCIJ's resolution concerning the judicial practice of the court, adopted in 1931 and revised in 1936, laid down the internal procedures to be followed during the court's deliberations on each case. While helping to resolve some serious international disputes, many of them being consequences of the First World War, the decisions of the PCIJ often clarified previously unclear areas of international law and even contributed to their development. This was important because, as they said, unclear issues, and there are new challenges, new problems which did not have any precedents. So the court had to open the way for future hearings or future resolution of disputes. So how was the International Court of Justice formed? What is its composition and what role does it play in the international affairs? After the Second World War, when the United Nations was founded, the International Court of Justice was established as its principal judicial organ. Now, earlier, PCIJ was independent of the League of Nations, but in this case, the International Court of Justice was part of the United Nations. And this happened in June 1945 through through a charter of the United Nations. So the ICJ is a reincarnation of the PCIJ as much as UNO is a reincarnation of the League of Nations. Some may not agree to that, but yes, you can say the reincarnation or the next step in the evolution of this organization. The ICJ is composed of 15 judges who are elected for terms of office of 9 years by the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council are France, Russia, China, the United Kingdom and the United States, and they always have a judge on the court. The ICJ's role can be described as twofold. At one level it is advisory and at another it is judicial. Its advisory function is open only to specified United Nations bodies and agencies. Everybody cannot approach for seeking its advice. The court's opinions are consultative and do not generally result in judgments for the resolution of specific disputes. The other role is to settle the legal disputes submitted to it by the various states. In this respect, the Corfu Channel case is of immense importance. Now, what is this Corfu Channel case? The Corfu Channel case was a public international law case heard before the ICJ between 1947 and 1949. It concerned state responsibility for damages at sea as well as the doctrine of innocent passage. And I am giving its brief account here. A series of encounters from May to November 1946 in the Corfu Channel between the United Kingdom and the People's Republic of Albania, one of which resulted in damage to 2 Royal Navy ships and significant loss of life, prompting the United Kingdom to bring a suit in the ICJ for seeking reparations. After an initial ruling on the jurisdiction in 1948, the ICJ issued separate merits and compensation judgments in 1949. The court awarded the United Kingdom £843,947 This amount remained unpaid for decades, and British efforts to see it paid led to another ICJ case to resolve competing Italian and Albanian claims to more than 2 tons of Nazi gold. Well, this was one of the legacies of the Second World War, the Nazi gold. In 1996, Albania and the United Kingdom settled the judgment along with Albania's outstanding claim to the gold. So that's how it got settled. The Corfu Channel case has had a lasting influence on the practice of international law, especially the law of the sea. The concept of innocent passage issued by the court was ultimately adopted in several important law of the sea conventions. The stance taken by the court on the use of force has been of importance in subsequent decisions, such as Nicaragua versus the United States. I will explain this in a moment. No doubt, the case served to set many procedural trends followed in subsequent ICJ proceedings. Here I am talking about the Corfu case. Cases before the ICJ are resolved in one of the three ways. They can be settled by the parties at any time during the proceedings. Number two, a state can discontinue the proceedings and withdraw at any point. There is no compulsion for it to stay in the proceedings if it doesn't want to. The court can deliver a verdict. That is the final third step. So what sort of jurisdiction does the court enjoy? Let us be very clear. The International Court of Justice does not enjoy complete and unchallengeable jurisdiction in any matter. Keeping this in mind, one can say that it has jurisdiction in two types of cases. Number one, contentious issues between states in which the court produces binding rulings between states that agree or have previously agreed to submit to the ruling of the court. And number two, advisory opinions which provide reasoned but non-binding rulings on properly submitted questions of international law, usually at the request of the United Nations General Assembly. The court has jurisdiction which is based on consent. This much is clear. This has also been defined in the Charter of United Nations. Article 36 subsection 1 provides that parties may refer cases to the court. This method is based on explicit consent and is perhaps the most effective basis for the court's jurisdiction. This voluntary clause paves the way for parties to not participate in proceedings. This voluntary clause paves the way for parties to not participate in proceedings and refuse to abide by the decisions of the court in a particular matter. For example, Iran refused to participate in the case of the Iran hostage crisis this case was actually brought by the USA and was based on the voluntary clause of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. But Iran did not comply with the order of the court. Now, what was this hostage crisis? The Iranian hostage crisis was a diplomatic standoff between Iran and the United States, where 52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage for more than 400 days. In fact, almost 450 days. Between November 4, 1979 to January 20, 1981. This happened when a group of Iranian students belonging to the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, who supported the Iranian Revolution, took over the US Embassy in Tehran. It stands as the longest hostage crisis in recorded history. Yes, 400 plus days is long enough, more than a year. Article 36 subsection 2 of this charter allows states to make declarations accepting the court's jurisdiction as compulsory. A state party can declare any time to accept the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice in a matter related to conventions or international law. Article 36(5) of the same charter provides for jurisdiction based on declarations made under the Permanent Court of International Justice's statute. The previous court's statute was valid here too. Is rather valid here too. Article 37 of the ICJ's statute similarly transfers jurisdiction under any compromissory clause in a treaty that gives jurisdiction to the PCIJ, or rather gave jurisdiction to the PCIJ earlier. A compromissory clause is a clause in a treaty providing for the submission of a matter or matters to arbitration. Now let us talk about the Nicaragua case. It is very important case. The term compulsory jurisdiction is misleading since declarations by the states are voluntary and can be withdrawn at any time. This was amply proved in the Nicaragua case. According to the Washington Post report dated April 7, 1984, and I quote, the CIA has played a direct role in the laying of underwater mines in Nicaraguan ports that have damaged at least 8 ships from various nations during the past 2 months, according to congressional and administration sources. A combination of US financial guerrillas fighting the leftist Sandinista government of Nicaragua and more highly trained Latin American employees of the CIA operating from CIA-owned speedboats have laid the crude bottom-lying mines in Corinto and other ports, according to the sources. Unquote. So, Nicaragua lodged a complaint in the ICJ against the USA for violating various treaties and general principles of international law. The USA argued that A. ICJ doesn't have any jurisdiction on treaties, and B. compulsory jurisdiction did not apply in this case. So, it is USA which is now laying the law or the convention. So, when the ICJ issued a verdict against the USA in 1984, USA simply refused to comply and it withdrew its acceptance from the compulsory jurisdiction. When this case was brought before the Security Council, the USA vetoed the decision of the Security Council. Well, that's how the real world is. The big boys have their own rules, have their own laws, and you can do nothing about it. Lesser nations can do nothing about it. Anyway, the USA or any of the other 4 permanent members seem to be above international law as enforced by the ICJ. This is understood. So, should the ICJ have more powers and compulsory jurisdiction? Would that help? It is not easy to answer this question. We do not know how things will play out if the ICJ is so empowered. But given how the Security Council functions and the great powers like United States, China, etc. have been having their way with the ICJ and Security Council, it is just as well that the ICJ does not have the absolute jurisdiction. The Big Five call the shots in the Security Council. They can defy the ICJ at will. So, whether it is China laying claims to sovereignty over territories of smaller Southeast Asian countries, even the bigger South Asian country like India, or even Japan and Taiwan, or Russia bullying Ukraine, or various disputes in West Asia, Central Asia and elsewhere, the UNO and ICJ are at best helpless bystanders. They can do nothing except passing some resolutions which remain on paper. They don't affect anything on the ground. Unless the UNO and its various organs are genuinely democratized, it is difficult to imagine the credible and empowered International Court of Justice becoming a reality. Well, what sort of democratization could be done? It really requires a lot of brainstorming, and I don't know whether this would happen in any foreseeable future. Anyway, thanks for being with me, and I shall come back with another episode soon. Bye bye.